It's the Side Quest Podcast.
You know the feeling. You're just, you're scrolling through TikTok on a random Tuesday evening. You aren't really looking for anything heavy.
Really, you just want a distraction.
Exactly. Maybe a recipe or, a funny dog video, something light. And then the algorithm just drops a clip into your feed that completely arrests your attention.
It happens so fast, too.
It really does. It's this 15-year-old boy sitting in a neon-lit gaming chair, and he's staring dead into his phone camera. And with this utterly unearned clinical confidence, he just proceeds to lecture you about how women are, quote, hypergamous by nature.
Right.
He's casually throwing around all this dense evolutionary biology terminology to describe, middle school dating dynamics.
It's a highly jarring disconnect to witness because, you have a teenager mimicking the cadence of a seasoned sociologist, right? But the underlying message is just steeped in this deeply cynical biological fatalism.
Yeah. And if you're listening to this, your first instinct is probably to just roll your eyes or laugh it off so you swipe away.
Yeah.
But suddenly you're on YouTube Shorts, and now it's a totally different aesthetic.
A completely different vibe, yeah.
It's a muscular guy smoking a thick cigar.
Wow.
He's sitting in a rented Lamborghini wearing this bespoke suit, and he's literally screaming into a microphone that weakness is a choice.
And that modern society is a literal matrix.
Exactly. A matrix designed to keep men poor and docile and subservient. And the thing is, you didn't search for this. You didn't type alpha male training into your search bar. Last week, you were searching for, how to fix a leaky faucet. And today, you have been algorithmically dropped squarely into the middle of the manosphere.
And that's the thing. The passive consumption of this is what makes it so incredibly pervasive. The ecosystem is designed to find you. It doesn't wait for you to find it.
Yeah.
And once you interact, even if you just, if you pause on that video out of sheer morbid curiosity, the algorithmic feedback loop just closes right around you.
It traps you.
Completely. It becomes an incredibly difficult informational silo to escape.
So we're taking on a massive, highly complex, and just intensely relevant topic today. We are doing a deep dive into breaking down the manosphere. And to do this properly, we've assembled a pretty formidable stack of sources.
We really have.
We've got a comprehensive, heavily researched sociological report that details the history, the psychological hooks, and the global spread of this digital movement. We're also integrating some really recent on-the-ground reporting by the BBC.
Specifically, their coverage and the panel reactions to that Louis Theroux documentary, right?
Right. Inside the Manosphere, where journalists actually sat down face-to-face with the young men who are consuming and producing this content.
And we're also bringing in real-time primary source legal documents from the UK judiciary.
Yes, which is wild.
It is. We have court orders that outline the very severe, highly mundane criminal realities facing some of the most visible figures in this space. It creates this massive contrast between their online personas and their actual lives.
So our mission for this deep dive is to basically build a complete map of this territory. We'll trace the honestly, surprisingly counterintuitive timeline of how this ideology emerged. Because it started long before social media even existed.
Decades before.
Right. And we are going to deconstruct the specific psychological machinery that is currently capturing the minds of millions of young men and boys right now. We'll track the real-world fallout that is spilling out of screens and into classrooms and analyze where this whole cultural force is heading next.
But, to set the baseline for this analysis, we have to establish a cognitive framework first.
Okay, what does that mean?
Well, it requires holding two seemingly contradictory ideas at the exact same time. First, we must look at the documented harms of this movement, the misogyny, the radicalisation pipeline, the physical violence, and we have to treat them with the absolute utmost seriousness. They are undeniable.
Okay, and what's the second idea we have to hold?
We have to treat the genuine unmet needs and the real psychological pain of the young men drawn to this movement with that exact same level of seriousness.
That's a really fine line to walk.
It is. Condemning the ideology is straightforward. But if we just stop at condemnation, and refuse to understand the profound vulnerability that makes the ideology appealing in the first place, we will never actually grasp the mechanics of the crisis.
That dual approach makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Because dismissing these teenagers as just inherently bad people completely ignores this massive industrial pipeline that was literally built to exploit their insecurities.
Exactly.
So to understand how we ended up with a digital landscape dominated by influencers demanding total subservience, we really have to look backward. And I was blown away by this in the sources because the origins of this movement don't start with algorithms.
No, they don't.
And surprisingly, they don't even start with anti-feminism. They start with the men's liberation movement of the 1960s and 1970s.
Yeah, the initial framework of men's liberation was actually a very thoughtful, progressive response to rigid traditional masculinity. It evolved kind of parallel to second wave feminism.
Wait, so they were working together?
Yes. The core thesis among these early thinkers was that the dominant male gender role, the unyielding stoicism, the pressure to be the sole economic provider, the expectation of complete emotional repression, that all of that was highly destructive.
So they're arguing that while the patriarchy oppressed women, the traditional masculine ideal was simultaneously crushing men.
Exactly. They were fundamentally allied with the feminist movement of the time. They were essentially saying, hey, we are also trapped in a box.
A box that says a man's only intrinsic value is his paycheck.
Right, or that a man expressing vulnerability is somehow a failure.
I mean, breaking out of that framework sounds incredibly healthy and productive.
Yeah.
So how does a collaborative, emotionally aware movement fracture into what we see today? Like, what was the wedge issue?
Well, the fracture points really emerged in the late 1970s and solidified in the 1980s. And they centered around very specific legal and social friction points. A faction of men's advocates began to pivot away from critiquing those structural gender roles. And instead, they began framing feminism itself, specifically the institutional gains of women's empowerment, as the primary antagonist. And this right here is the genesis of the men's rights activists, or MRAs.
And they focus really heavily on family court, right?
Yeah.
Like child custody battles and divorce law.
Exactly. The MRAs looked at family court outcomes, where mothers were historically granted custody at much higher rates, and they argued that the legal system inherently favored women.
Right.
So therefore, in their view, feminism had evolved from an equality movement into a mechanism for the active subjugation of men.
But, I mean, that pivot requires a massive intellectual blind spot. The whole reason family courts historically favored mothers in custody disputes was entirely due to the patriarchal structure that assigned women the role of default caregiver in the first place.
Precisely. It was a self-fulfilling prophecy of those traditional gender roles.
Instead of critiquing that underlying structure, the MRAs just blamed the women who were advocating for their own rights. So that grievance, that belief that men are being legally and socially disenfranchised by female progress, that became the political foundation.
Right. But political resentment alone doesn't build the manosphere.
True.
There's a parallel behavioral strand that emerges in the late 80s and 90s that we have to talk about.
The seduction community.
Yes. Better known as the pickup artist or PUA era.
Which is just a wild shift from politics.
It really is. In its earliest iterations in the late 70s, it operated almost as an underground self-help network for socially anxious men.
Right. It was marketed as basic social skills training, like
Yeah.
how to initiate a conversation, how to overcome approach anxiety, just basic stuff.
Yeah, but as it moved into the 90s, it warped. It turned into a highly systematized predatory framework for the psychological manipulation of women.
It totally stripped away the humanity of the interaction. Consent and mutual connection were just replaced by formulas and routines. And we obviously know this culminated culturally in the mid-2000s with the explosive mainstream success of that book, The Game, by Neil Strauss.
Yes, that was the mainstreaming of it.
But what really strikes me in the research report is how the PUA era essentially drafted the permanent vocabulary for the modern manosphere.
Yeah.
The concepts they invented back then are exactly what that 15-year-old on TikTok is repeating today.
The linguistic legacy of the PUA community is profound. I mean, they codified negging.
Ugh, negging. Let's explain that for people who might not know.
Negging is the tactic of delivering a strategic, backhanded compliment. The goal is to deliberately lower a woman's self-esteem so that she seeks the manipulator's validation.
It's just psychological abuse disguised as flirting.
It is. And they obsessed over the alpha versus beta male dichotomy. And crucially, they popularized the concept of hypergamy.
Right, which we mentioned earlier.
They weaponized this sort of pseudoscientific evolutionary psychology to convince men that women are biologically incapable of genuine love.
Wow.
Yeah. The claim is that women are instead hardwired to ruthlessly seek the highest status, wealthiest, most dominant male available.
It's a completely transactional worldview. In this view, women aren't people. They are basically obstacles guarding a prize. And if you input the correct psychological cheat codes, you extract the prize.
That is exactly how they viewed it.
So we have the political grievance from the MRAs, and we have the manipulative behavioral playbook from the PUAs. And when the internet age really hits its stride in the 2000s, these previously isolated subcultures collide.
They find each other on message boards and Reddit.
Yeah, and this collision butts the central unifying mythology of the entire ecosystem, the red pill.
Right. The manosphere entirely co-opted the Wachowskis' cinematic metaphor from The Matrix.
Taking the blue pill represents remaining asleep, right?
Exactly. It means accepting the mainstream cultural narrative that society strives for equality, that relationships are based on mutual affection, and that traditional dating norms still apply.
And the red pill awakening is the complete rejection of all that. It's adopting the belief that gender dynamics are a rigged game where women hold absolute structural and social power.
The red pill posits that the only rational survival strategy for a man is to ruthlessly optimize himself, financially, physically, and socially, because he has to dominate a system that is, in their minds, actively plotting against him.
It's such a bleak way to view the world.
Yeah.
And as this red pill ideology was consolidating on forums like the red pill subreddit, a parallel community was metastasizing right alongside it, the incels, or involuntary celibates.
Yeah, and the history here is really important.
I actually have to stop here because the history of the incel community is a profound irony. It really highlights how radically digital spaces can be corrupted. Because the term incel wasn't coined by an angry young man.
No, it wasn't.
It was coined in 1997 by a Canadian woman known online as Alana. She started a mailing list designed to be a deeply inclusive, supportive haven for lonely people of all genders and orientations who were struggling to find romantic connection.
It was supposed to be a space to process isolation without judgment. It was essentially a digital empathy circle.
Exactly. And over the ensuing decade, that community was subjected to what I can only really describe as algorithmic gentrification, or like a hostile ideological takeover.
That's a good way to put it.
The space was just flooded by angry men. Women were aggressively, systematically harassed and pushed out, and the foundational premise of support was totally erased. It morphed into this hyper-misogynistic echo chamber.
Yeah.
It's the equivalent of a community setting up a collaborative neighborhood garden, right? Only to have a militant group violently seize the plot, pave over the soil with concrete, and use it to stockpile weapons. The original intent of the space was entirely obliterated.
And that hostile takeover completely redefined the incel identity. It shifted from I am struggling to connect to a rigid biological fatalism.
What do you mean by biological fatalism?
Well, the modern incel ideology asserts that physical attributes, we're talking about millimeter measurements of a jawline, or skeletal height, permanently dictate a man's worth.
So they believe there's nothing they can do.
Exactly. It absolves the individual of any need for personal growth because the game is supposedly mathematically rigged from birth, all while placing the entirety of the blame for their suffering squarely on women.
So all these factions are just simmering in the respective corners of the internet by the early 2010s, but they're still somewhat disjointed. Then we hit 2014. The catalyst arrives.
Gamergate.
Okay, wait. I really need to push back on this connection because Gamergate started as a controversy over video game reviews, right? And ethics in games journalism. I mean, it was messy, it was toxic, but it was fundamentally about internet nerd culture. How does an argument over video game ethics bridge the gap to actual political radicalization and the alt-right? Those feel like two completely distinct arenas.
They definitely seem distinct until you examine the mechanics of the conflict rather than the subject matter. Gamergate quickly ceased to be about video games at all.
Really?
Yeah, it rapidly evolved into a massive decentralized harassment campaign. And the targets were female game developers, journalists, and progressive cultural critics. What the research report highlights, particularly the analysis by Annie Kelly, is that Gamergate functioned as a massive operational beta test for the manosphere.
A beta test for what exactly? Like coordination?
For weaponizing digital outrage at scale. The factions of the manosphere learned that if you coordinate a swarm attack against a common enemy, in this case, women encroaching on a traditionally male-dominated cultural space, the social media algorithms will massively reward that conflict with visibility.
Outrage equaled amplification.
Exactly. Gamergate provided the template for cross-pollination. This is what Kelly refers to as the alt-right integration years. Anti-feminist gamers realized they shared common enemies, overlapping vocabularies, and identical digital tactics with explicit white nationalist and alt-right political movements.
They realized the power of an aggregated grievance. Gamergate wrote the tactical playbook, but a playbook needs a massive distribution network to become an empire. And that brings us to the late 2010s and early 2020s, where the algorithmic architectures of YouTube, TikTok, and X allowed this ideology to scale globally.
Right.
So if we look at the map of the manosphere today, in 2026, it's highly stratified. It's not a monolith at all. The report breaks it down into a spectrum of active factions.
And on one end of that spectrum, you have the political wing.
Right.
The modern men's rights activists. They focus their rhetoric on undeniably critical public policy failures.
Right.
They point out that men account for roughly 75% of suicides in most Western nations. They highlight the severe educational gap where boys are falling dramatically behind.
And to be clear, those are urgent, objective crises that society absolutely must address.
Absolutely. The danger of the MRA faction isn't that they identify fake problems, it's the causal mechanism they assign to those real problems.
Right. Who do you blame?
Yes. They insist that male suicide rates and educational deficits are the direct, deliberate result of female empowerment and feminist policy. They operate on a strict zero-sum fallacy. Any societal gain for a woman is inherently an act of oppression against a man.
Moving along the spectrum, we see the evolution of the PUAs. Now, they rarely use the term pickup artist anymore. It's been sanitized.
Yeah, it's called dating coaching for the TikTok era.
Right. But the operational philosophy is identical. It's relentlessly transactional. They teach young men that a woman's lack of interest is merely a negotiation tactic to be systematically dismantled.
They view the concept of consent not as a boundary, but as an objection to handle.
Exactly. It's incredibly manipulative. Then further along the spectrum, you have the isolationist wing, MGTOW, men going their own way.
MGTOW represents a fascinating, albeit incredibly dark, sociological phenomenon. These are men who have concluded that the legal and social risks of interacting with women, whether through marriage, family court, or even casual dating, are so catastrophic that the only logical response is total withdrawal from society's gender dynamics.
But, how does an ideology based on isolation sustain itself online? The internet demands visibility and engagement. If your philosophy is literally, leave me alone, how are you generating content?
That is the inherent contradiction of MGTOW. While the philosophy dictates quiet withdrawal, the algorithmic reality forces them to constantly broadcast their withdrawal to seek validation.
So they have to post about how much they don't care.
Exactly. Consequently, MGTOW forums rarely focus on male self-actualization. They devolve into all-consuming, obsessive catalogs of perceived female flaws.
That sounds exhausting.
The psychological pull is severe. The research links heavy MGTOW consumption to extreme pessimism, mental health deterioration, and heightened suicidal ideation. It is a digital echo chamber of profound loneliness.
Which brings us to the most visually extreme modern manifestation on this map, the looks maxers.
Oh, yes.
These are young men who have internalized that incel doctrine that skeletal structure is destiny. But rather than isolating, they pursue incredibly dangerous physical modifications.
We really do.
The report specifically details a practice called bone smashing, and we need to explain the mechanics of this because it truly defies belief.
It does. Bone smashing involves young men taking blunt, hard objects, we're talking hammers, heavy weights, or specialized tools, and repeatedly striking their own faces.
Their own faces.
Yes. They target their jawlines and cheekbones.
To what conceivable end? Why?
The pseudoscientific theory circulated on these forums is based on a gross misinterpretation of Wolff's Law of bone adaptation.
Okay, what is Wolff's Law?
It's a real medical concept that bones will adapt to the loads under which they are placed, but they believe that deliberately microfracturing their facial bones with a hammer will force the bone to calcify and heal thicker.
So they're artificially manufacturing a jawline.
Yes, the pronounced hypermasculine alpha jawline that the ideology claims is mandatory for social survival.
It is literal physical self-harm masquerading as self-improvement. They're taking hammers to their faces because an internet subculture convinced them their natural biology makes them worthless.
It's tragic.
So who is profiting from this psychological devastation? Who are the architects sitting atop this ecosystem? The report identifies a clear hierarchy, starting with the intellectual veneer provided by figures like Jordan Peterson.
Right. Peterson operates as a highly sophisticated gateway. He is an academic, a clinical psychologist, and it must be noted that a significant number of young men genuinely credit his early work with helping them find baseline stability.
Like telling them to clean their rooms, adopt personal responsibility, stuff like that.
Exactly.
But the analysis shows his function within the broader manosphere is to lend academic credibility to its core tenets. Because he consistently frames feminism as a civilizational threat and advocates for rigid, biologically determined hierarchies, he basically normalizes the underlying premises of the manosphere.
Yeah. A young man absorbs Peterson's dense Jungian analysis of gender chaos, right? And the algorithm then smoothly transitions him to much raw, unvarnished iterations of those exact same concepts.
And the algorithm then typically hands them off to the amplifiers, the prime example here being Joe Rogan.
Right. Now, Rogan is not a manosphere creator. His content is vastly broader than that.
Sure.
However, he commands an audience of hundreds of millions, predominantly young men, by consistently platforming anti-feminist thinkers, right-wing provocateurs, and manosphere-adjacent figures in a casual conversational setting. He essentially launders those ideologies into the mainstream cultural water supply.
And once you move past the gateways and the amplifiers, you hit the deeply toxic bedrock. Programs like the Fresh and Fit podcast.
Hosted by Myron Gaines and Walter Weeks.
Yes, and this show explicitly targets young men of color. It seamlessly blends cryptocurrency hawking and fitness advice with unabashed male supremacist rhetoric. I mean, Gaines literally published a book titled Why Women Deserve Less.
It's very blatant.
You also see influencers like Sneeko and Justin Waller, who featured really prominently in the BBC documentary. Sneeko is particularly alarming because you can watch his real-time algorithmic radicalization over the last few years on YouTube. He literally chased the engagement metrics directly into extreme misogyny and bigotry.
Yet, every single one of these figures, from the academics to the podcasters, they all ultimately orbit the center of gravity in this space.
Andrew Tate,
Yes.
the British-American former kickboxer, who essentially crowned himself the emperor of the manosphere. He took the bitter, isolated grievances of the incel boards and gave them a high-definition cinematic makeover. He packaged blatant misogyny inside a hyper-aspirational lifestyle brand.
The marketing genius of Andrew Tate was realizing that young men didn't want to listen to someone complaining in a dark basement.
No, they want success.
They wanted to listen to a man smoking a cigar on a yacht, stepping off a private jet, and flaunting Bugattis. He constructed a narrative that this extreme wealth and absolute dominance over women was the natural reward for escaping the matrix.
His term for the societal norms that demand respect and equality.
Right.
And the reach he achieved is just staggering. Even after being deplatformed across multiple networks, his reinstated X account commands over 10 million followers. But the most alarming data point in this entire deep dive comes from a Hope Not Hate poll. 80% of British 16 and 17-year-old boys have consumed Andrew Tate's content.
80%.
He possesses more name recognition among teenage boys than the leaders of their own governments. But here's where the narrative completely fractures. The persona Tate projects online is that of an unpenetrable James Bond-esque renegade who has outsmarted the global elites. The reality, which is documented in our BBC and UK judiciary sources, is a grim, highly bureaucratic legal nightmare.
The contrast is absolute. In December 2022, Romanian authorities arrested Andrew and his brother Tristan. Andrew was accused of rape, human trafficking, and forming an organized criminal group.
Serious charges.
Extremely serious. After months of preventative detention and house arrest, they faced further allegations in August 2024 involving sex with a minor and trafficking underage persons. Now, they vehemently deny all charges, framing the legal proceedings as a coordinated attack by the Matrix.
But the legal net extends way beyond Romania now. The BBC's May 2025 reporting confirmed that the UK's Crown Prosecution Service officially authorized 21 charges against the brothers.
21 charges?
Yeah. This stems from a massive file of evidence compiled by Bedfordshire Police regarding allegations spanning all the way from 2012 to 2015. Andrew is facing 10 charges connected to 3 alleged victims, including rape, actual bodily harm, and controlling prostitution for gain. And Tristan faces 11 charges.
And their legal maneuvering has been incredibly chaotic. Early in 2025, when Romanian prosecutors unexpectedly lifted their 2-year travel ban, the brothers immediately flew to Florida.
Just left right away.
Yep. Then in March, they returned to Romania, telling reporters on the tarmac that innocent men don't run from anything, and claiming the trip was merely to register with authorities. But they are currently locked in a fierce extradition battle.
Right.
A Romanian court ruled they can be extradited to Britain, but only after the conclusion of the Romanian criminal trials.
Which means they are trapped in a slow-grinding legal purgatory.
Yeah.
And to emphasize how thoroughly uncinematic this reality actually is, we pulled a primary document from the UK High Court, King's Bench Division, dated June 12, 2026.
Right.
This isn't a shadowy confrontation with elite agents. It is an order from the Honorable Mr. Justice Chamberlain, regarding the Tate brothers' application for permission to apply for judicial review. And it is the most mundane, bureaucratic text imaginable.
It really is. It meticulously outlines the rules for remote observation of the hearing. Anyone wanting a transmission direction request under Section 85A3B of the Courts Act, 2003,
Very catchy.
must email the administrative court office by 10 a.m., provide their full name and location, and sign a statement acknowledging that recording the hearing is a criminal contempt of court.
It's literally an email address at justice.gov.uk and a half-day time estimate. There is no matrix. There are only administrative clerks, high court judges, and 21 catastrophic criminal charges waiting across the channel.
Exactly.
But if the emperor is tangled in this web of highly bureaucratic legal restrictions, why is the illusion still holding millions of boys captive? This brings us to the psychological core of our analysis. It's too easy to dismiss these followers as just toxic kids. If we do that, we miss the industrial machinery exploiting their pain.
We do, because the entire ecosystem is built on the foundation of profound, documented male vulnerability.
Let's talk about the data on that.
The Equimundo State of American Men 2023 report provides the empirical backing for this. 2/3 of young men report feeling that no one really knows me. We are witnessing a systemic epidemic of social isolation among young men.
2/3? That's heartbreaking. You layer that emotional isolation over a landscape of material failure. We have a severe educational crisis where boys are underperforming girls at virtually every milestone from primary school through higher education.
Right.
And we have a macroeconomic environment where the traditional markers of adult success, owning a home, securing a career that can support a family, feel entirely out of reach for Gen Z.
The BBC Newsbeat panel brilliantly humanized this data. They spoke with Anakin Lee, who is a 22-year-old forensic science graduate. He has been relentlessly searching for a job for 6 months without success.
I did everything right.
He did. And Anakin clearly articulated the psychological hook. When you have played by the rules, dedicated years to education, and find yourself completely stalled, you feel incredibly vulnerable.
Yeah.
So if an influencer suddenly appears on your feed, projecting absolute certainty, wealth, and offering a secret shortcut to bypass the rigged system, the allure is almost impossible to resist.
Another young man on that panel, Zisham Khan, described the collateral damage this mindset causes. He watched his own friends adopt this hyper-competitive worldview, believing that if their peers weren't generating wealth or aspiring to move to Dubai, they needed to be cut off.
Wow.
It actively destroys the few organic support networks these young men actually possess, driving them further into the isolation the influencers exploit. But the radicalization process isn't immediate. The algorithm doesn't drop a 13-year-old straight into extreme misogyny.
No, the architecture of the pipeline relies on a bait and switch. The initial point of contact is almost invariably basic self-help.
It's a Trojan horse.
Exactly.
But instead of wood, it's constructed out of protein powder, cryptocurrency tutorials, and advice on how to iron a shirt.
Precisely. A young boy searches YouTube for entirely positive, constructive reasons. He wants a beginner's workout routine. He wants to know how to present himself better. He wants basic financial literacy.
And the influencer provides genuinely useful practical advice. Stand up straight. Hit the gym. Be disciplined.
Right. And by delivering utility, the influencer establishes a parasocial bond. They step into the role of a mentor, a life coach, or, crucially, a surrogate father figure for boys lacking guidance.
The trust is established. The Trojan horse is inside the gates. The PBS NewsHour report outlines the exact moment the payload is delivered.
Yeah, this part is crucial.
Imagine that young boy comes home from school after a humiliating day. He feels small, insecure. Perhaps he was rejected romantically or academically outshined by a girl in his class. He opens his phone, and his digital mentor is looking right at him saying, "It's not your fault you failed today. Society is rigged against you. Feminism has stripped you of your inherent value, and women are designing a world to keep you weak."
That narrative provides instant psychological relief. It completely absolves the young man of any personal responsibility for his discomfort. It hands him a clearly defined enemy to blame for his complex anxieties.
It's much easier to blame a grand conspiracy than to just feel inadequate.
Exactly. Furthermore, it integrates him into a digital brotherhood of millions of other young men who are sharing the exact same grievance.
And the algorithm aggressively accelerates the descent, because tech platforms optimize for engagement, and outrage is the most engaging emotion.
Right.
The algorithm recognizes the boy watched the push-up tutorial, so it nudges him toward a video about biological dominance, then to a podcast about hypergamy, and eventually into isolated extreme incel forums. The radicalization pipeline isn't a bug. It is the fundamental business model of the platforms.
Which forces us to confront the real-world fallout, because this ideology does not stay contained within Discord servers or TikTok feeds. It physically manifests in society, and the consequences are severe.
We have to start at the absolute extreme edge: violence against women.
While the vast majority of individuals who consume this content or identify as incels do not commit physical violence, the ideology inherently provides a radicalization pathway that has inspired multiple mass casualty attacks.
Right.
Within these extreme forums, mass killers are routinely glorified. They use a specific, chilling slang, going ER.
This refers to Elliot Rodger, the perpetrator of the 2014 Isla Vista mass shooting. He left behind a sprawling manifesto framing his violence as justified retribution against women for denying him romantic access.
Yes. When users talk about going ER, they are openly ideating mass violence. And this is not theoretical. We saw it with the 2018 Toronto van attack, where a self-identified incel murdered 11 people.
It's terrorism.
It is. Security researchers and law enforcement agencies now classify this specific glorification of violence as a distinct form of ideologically motivated violent extremism. It operates on the exact same radicalization mechanics as traditional terrorism.
And our sources bring this right up to the present day. In 2025, Kyle Clifford carried out a horrific triple murder in the UK, killing his ex-girlfriend, her sister, and her mother with a crossbow. During the investigation, it was confirmed that Clifford had been consuming Andrew Tate videos in the hours immediately leading up to the attack. The connective tissue between the digital rhetoric and physical violence is undeniable.
It really is.
But the harm is also pervasive in much more mundane everyday settings. Let's look at the systemic crisis unfolding in classrooms.
Right. The data provided by the UK Teachers Union, the NASUT, paints a very grim picture of the educational environment. Nearly 60% of British teachers report that social media has actively degraded pupil behavior.
60%.
Yeah. However, female educators are bearing a heavily disproportionate burden. The report documents widespread, systematic harassment of female staff by male students who are directly parroting MANOSPHERE rhetoric.
And the specifics are jarring. You have accounts of 14-year-old boys physically intimidating female teachers, blocking doorways, and this is wild, literally barking like dogs in the middle of a lesson.
Barking at their teachers.
Yes, because an online influencer convinced them that aggressively asserting dominance over women is the defining metric of masculinity. It creates a complete breakdown of authority.
It really does.
It makes me wonder, how does a school system effectively respond to this? If a middle school teacher gives a boy a detention for repeating Andrew Tate, isn't she just confirming the boy's pre-existing belief that the system is run by oppressive women trying to silence him?
That is the exact paradox educators are trapped in right now. Traditional disciplinary frameworks, detentions, suspensions are designed to punish specific actions. But here, the action is merely a symptom of a deeply entrenched worldview.
Right.
If a female teacher suspends him, he views himself as a martyr to his digital community. The punishment validates the ideology. Schools are discovering that behavioral correction is useless without ideological deprogramming, which is a task for which educators are completely undertrained and fundamentally under-resourced.
The collateral damage extends to female students as well, who report being subjected to aggressive, non-consensual grading of their physical appearances and constant harassment from their male peers.
The Child and Adolescent Mental Health Journal indicates this environment is severely distorting an entire generation's understanding of consent and healthy relationships.
But if we pull back the lens even further, we see the most profound sociological consequence of all: the political polarization of a generation.
The global data highlights an unprecedented demographic divergence here. Across North America, Western Europe, and Asia, young men and young women are rapidly moving to opposite ends of the political spectrum.
It's splitting.
Completely. Young men are shifting sharply to the political right, while young women are moving emphatically to the left.
Now, we really need to pause here and be incredibly explicit with you, the listener. We are not evaluating the moral or practical validity of right-wing versus left-wing politics.
Absolutely not. We are not taking a political stance.
Right. We are not taking a side on Trump or South Korean elections or any of it. We are strictly analyzing the sociological and electoral data presented in our sources, which demonstrates how algorithmic echo chambers are physically dividing the political realities of a generation.
The empirical evidence is stark. The research cites the United States 2024 presidential election, where men aged 18 to 29 exhibited a dramatic 14-point shift toward Donald Trump compared to older male demographics.
Wow.
Simultaneously, young women moved in the exact reverse direction. The sociological analysis suggests that the cultural grievances cultivated in the manosphere are increasingly functioning as the on-ramp for broader political realignment.
And South Korea serves as the most intense case study for this phenomenon. The generational gender divide there is among the sharpest in the world, with anti-feminist sentiment among young Korean men organizing into a massive, decisive electoral voting bloc.
It's reshaping their entire political landscape.
We're looking at a scenario where young men and women aren't just disagreeing on marginal tax rates or foreign policy. They are operating in mutually exclusive algorithmic realities with completely incompatible foundational values.
Right.
If men and women view each other primarily as hostile political adversaries rather than partners, the long-term implications for social cohesion and family formation are staggering.
And this demographic reality forces us to look toward the future. The most critical realization derived from our 2026 research report is that the debate over whether the manosphere will breach the mainstream is historically obsolete.
It's already happened.
It has. The manosphere is the mainstream youth culture for a massive plurality of young men in the English-speaking world.
The ideas are thoroughly institutionalized.
Yeah.
And we have to acknowledge the complete regulatory failure of the tech platforms in preventing this.
Oh, massive failure.
The sources indicate that rather than tightening safety measures, companies like Meta actively rolled back content moderation policies in early 2025. X reinstated previously banned extremist accounts. The underlying algorithmic architecture remains entirely dependent on maximizing engagement through outrage.
And legislative attempts, like the UK's Online Safety Act, are incredibly slow to enforce. They struggle to define the boundary between harmful radicalization and protected speech.
However, the cultural conversation around this algorithmic radicalization did experience a massive paradigm shift recently, driven not by policy, but by media. The report highlights the impact of the fictional 2025 Netflix miniseries, Adolescence.
The cultural footprint of that show was massive. It generated 145 million views in the first half of the year alone.
That's huge.
It provided a dramatized, highly realistic depiction of a teenage boy slowly slipping down the algorithmic rabbit hole into manosphere extremism, which culminated in a tragic act of violence against a female classmate.
And it served as a catalyst for parental awareness. Millions of parents were suddenly forced to ask, is this the specific machinery operating on my son's phone while he sits in his bedroom?
It shifted the blame from the individual child to the algorithmic delivery system. But while awareness is a prerequisite for change, it is not a solution in itself. The ultimate question is, how do we dismantle the pipeline?
Right. The BBC Newsbeat article gathered insights from frontline organizations dealing with the fallout. Refuge, a prominent domestic abuse charity, was unequivocal in drawing a direct line between manosphere rhetoric and the escalation of real-world violence against women. They demanded stringent accountability for tech executives.
But Women's Aid offered an incredibly nuanced addition to that. While acknowledging the Louis Theroux documentary as, quote, uncomfortable yet absolutely essential viewing, they stressed that condemnation is insufficient.
What did they suggest instead?
They stated, we must meet young people where they are, providing them with education on what healthy relationships look like.
That concept, meeting them where they are, is the critical pivot. Our main research report concludes by synthesizing the approaches of organizations like Equimundo and Movember. Their empirical work demonstrates a vital truth. These boys are fundamentally reachable.
They are not lost causes.
Remember Anakin Lee from the BBC panel, the graduate paralyzed by the job market? He isn't looking for misogyny. He is desperately looking for a roadmap.
Exactly.
These young men are seeking community, mentorship, and a sense of utility in a rapidly shifting economic landscape. They can be diverted from the radicalization pipeline, but you cannot simply lecture a boy on what not to be.
No, telling him don't be toxic or don't listen to Andrew Tate just leaves a vacuum.
You have to provide a compelling, constructive blueprint for what he should be. You have to directly address the underlying epidemic of male loneliness and academic failure. Taking the threat of the manosphere seriously requires taking the pain of young men seriously.
It demands acknowledging the legitimacy of their economic and social anxieties without validating the destructive, misogynistic framework they've been sold to explain those anxieties.
We have mapped an immense, deeply complex terrain today. We trace the history from the collaborative men liberation movements of the 1970s
Through the bitter fracture of men's rights activism.
into the manipulative transactional psychology of the 1990s pickup artists.
We examined how Gamergate weaponized digital outrage, forging the tactics that algorithms would later scale globally, resulting in a stratified ecosystem ranging from isolationist MGTOWs to physically destructive look-smaxers.
We analyze the emperor of this space, contrasting the aspirational online persona of Andrew Tate with the crushing bureaucratic reality of his 21 criminal charges and looming high court battles.
We dismantled the Trojan horse psychology, showing exactly how self-help content is used to build parasocial trust before delivering extreme ideological payloads to vulnerable boys.
We confronted the real-world devastation, from violent mass casualty ideation to the breakdown of authority in middle school classrooms to a generation politically fractured along gender lines.
And finally, we acknowledge that while the tech platforms have failed, the path forward relies on actively providing young men with a constructive, empathetic model of 21st century masculinity.
It is a sobering analysis, but recognizing that the root driver is a desire for connection means there is a clear, actionable pathway for positive intervention.
Absolutely.
Which leaves me with one final thought, something I want you to sit with long after you take your headphones off. Right now, the influencers dominating the manosphere are selling an incredibly exhausting, hyper-competitive vision of existence.
They really are.
It is a worldview where your intrinsic worth is entirely dependent on the rented exotic car you drive, the precise millimeter measurements of your jawline, and your capacity to constantly project physical and emotional dominance over everyone around you.
Right.
It is a philosophy that permits absolutely zero room for failure, for weakness, for grief, or for genuine, vulnerable human connection. But the unavoidable reality of the human condition is that everyone fails.
Everyone experiences weakness.
The rented Lamborghinis eventually have to be returned to the dealership, and age strips everyone of their physical dominance. So as this first generation of boys whose entire developmental psychology has been shaped inside this rigid algorithmic echo chamber, as they grow up and inevitably collide with the complex failures, heartbreaks, and vulnerabilities of real adult life, what happens? Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.